Hi guys, how are you all today morning? Good morning. Today is 13th December 2023. My name is TSV Raghavan and I live in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. This is my spiritual vlog on YouTube. HARDAN, 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 Haribol, TRSV Nectar, NECTAR, Nectar. In this particular vlog, in all my previous videos, we have been discussing about the knowledge and information that we have gleaned through the study of spiritual books, scriptures, contemplation on the material universe, and meditation on the spiritual universe. This particular video in this vlog is no exception to that rule. In fact, it is a mere continuation of all that we have been doing in all my previous videos. Kindly subscribe to this vlog and press the bell icon so that I may keep reminding you of all my previous, present, and future videos. So let us continue with the topic of discussion for today's video. In the past few videos, we have been trying to discuss and analyze about a very important term which plays a very important role in the psyche and the life of every human living entity, whether male or female, in this material world in a particular lifetime. This particular term is known as mind. According to Srimad Bhagavad Gita, a segment of the great Hindu epic Mahabharata, Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has described an average living entity in this material world very, very clearly. He mentions that every human living entity is like a chariot or the four layers of body that make a human living entity along with the spirit soul is like a chariot. This chariot is driven by five white horses which are termed to define the five senses that attack this human living entity all his or her lifetime. These five senses in the form of horses are going in different directions at the same time, so that this living entity is perennially confused, agitated, and upset. These five horses are being controlled by the reins, which are in the hands of the pilot of that chariot, and this pilot is known as intelligence. Intelligence is the driver of this chariot who is trying to control these five horses, which represent the five senses, namely sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. There is only one guy who is the passenger of this chariot, and he is sitting in the passenger seat of that human living entity and chariot. And this particular passenger is known as the spirit soul. There is one instrument which is driving this chariot. This instrument is known as mind. It is this mind that we are trying to analyze in detail in this particular video. Mind is the driving instrument of every living entity's chariot, whether he or she is male or female. Every vehicle, whether two-wheeler or four-wheeler or any machinery, has one driving instrument which is known as the engine of that vehicle or machinery. This engine is the main and perennial player in the life and times of that living vehicle or machinery. In the absence of this engine, that particular vehicle or machinery becomes redundant and has the value of a scrap. Similarly, mind, which represents the engine of this chariot, which is the living entity, whether male or female, is the most perennial instrument in that chariot. The absence of this mind will turn this living entity into a scrap. This is the very term or instrument that we are trying to discuss in this particular video. Now we can understand the very big importance of mind in every living entity. Mind is the subtle form or the origin of the mass of tissue called brain, which is safely embedded into the cranium of the gross body of every living entity. In other words, the brain of the gross body is the gross form of the very same subtle mind. Vibrations from the other three subtle bodies of a human, a living entity, send these vibrations after they originate in them into this mind. This mind transmits these vibrations to the brain of that gross body. The brain processes and selects all those messages according to the category or class to which that particular living entity belongs. After doing so, after selecting and processing some vibrations, the same brain extracts a juice out of those vibrations which have been selected. That juice is percolated down the gross body of that particular living entity, and he or she acts according to that percolated juice. This is a continuous process and perennial one at that, which begins as soon as a living entity is born as an infant in this material world during a lifetime, and it continues till the end when this person is ready to complete that lifetime and pass on to another. When this happens, the mind stops transmitting those messages to the brain, as a result of which the gross body of that particular living entity drops dead in this terra firma. However, the three layers of subtle body, along with their sanchit karma, memories, and the so called subtle mind, remain alive, and they form the parts of the gross body of that particular living entity in his or her next birth. This is the general introduction we should know about mind. We have been analyzing this particular matter in all some of my videos in the past. We have tried to deal with every point in them. In that process, we have also discussed about various case histories which authenticate this particular argument or theory. In my yesterday's video, we were talking about one case history consisting of the life and times of one particular guy or living entity known as Anthony Strollo, alias Tony Bender, who worshipped the dark negative forces in this terra firma and hence was a genuine member of the Sicilian Mafia in New York City in the United States of America in the early years or decades of the 20th century. Now, yesterday we talked about the early life of Tony Bender and how one day he vanished without a trace in the early 60s from his house in Staten Island. By now, though the wife of Tony Bender was not aware of his true identity, the cops came to know about it through their stable of informers. Now, after getting a direction for their investigation on the sudden disappearance of Tony Bender, the cops began investigating further. When they did so, they traced this man's history to one gentleman called Vito Genovese, who was sitting in the Sing Sing prison of New York State, where he had been sentenced to a 15-year imprisonment. Vito Genovese, who was second in command of that particular crime family called Luciano family, had now converted that family's name into his own, thus making it be called as the Genovese family. There was one particular link between Vito Genovese in prison and Tony Bender in Staten Island. This guy was known as Tony Eboli. Now the police began investigating the disappearance of Tony Bender. I am discussing this case history only to make you realize how the mind of an individual human living entity works. The police suspected initially that this sudden disappearance of this fishy, suspicious, and mysterious Tony Bender had something to do with that man called Don Vito or Vito Genovese. Now they tried to find out what exactly happened. For this, we will have to look into the minds of various players in this story. Tony Eboli, the link between Vito Genovese and Tony Bender, was actually a manager of boxing matches in New York. After earning some money as a boxing manager, this guy left that profession and joined the mafia under Vito Genovese. This guy was the right hand man of Vito Genovese. It seems that this Vito Genovese had some beef with this man called Tony Bender. So Vito Genovese, though he was sitting in prison, asked Tony Eboli to make Tony Bender disappear. Tony Eboli used his own underlings in Staten Island to make Tony Bender disappear in the thin air. The fact remains that though Tony Bender vanished in 1960 or 62, his body was never found. Now we will find the grouse of Vito Genovese against Tony Bender. For that, we will have to go even further back. Vito Genovese was the right hand man of another mobster called Salvatore Lucania. This Salvatore Lucania was the original boss of that crime family called the Luciano family because Salvatore Lucania's nickname was Lucky Luciano. This lucky Luciano had a very faithful underling called Pascal Iboli. Pascal Iboli was the younger brother of this guy called Tony Iboli. However, just like Pascal Iboli was under Lucky Luciano, similarly, Tony Iboli was under Vito Genovese. We will talk about this further in my next video. It is over in this particular video. Thanks.